you're joining us here in person, our computer is frozen, so we have to restart that. But if you're joining us online, we're now streaming again separately. So in person, you won't see the words on the screen, but you have everything in your bulletin. These past several weeks during the season of Advent, we've been looking at different Christmas traditions, specifically because the last few years during COVID, our Christmas traditions have been affected, have been altered. In fact, all of the traditions in our lives have been greatly affected. Has anyone else been frustrated that their traditions have been messed up these past several years? You see, we need traditions. Traditions help to ground us in humanity. Now, the Latin word for tradition means to transmit, or to hand over, or to give for safekeeping. And so when we have traditions, we are passing them along from one generation to the next. In our families, there are many traditions that we hand down from our parents to us to our children because they have meaning for us. We want them to guard them, to give them for safekeeping. Even in our society, we have different traditions that we like to pass on from one generation to the next. And even in a church, we have many traditions that we like to pass along from one generation to the next. These traditions also give us comfort. Each and every Sunday when we gather for worship, that's part of our tradition, right? We like to gather for worship. We generally don't like our church service to be changed a whole lot. Most of us prefer a certain style of worship, and we don't like it being changed. You would not like if I came here on Sundays and you didn't know what the order of the service would be. If we didn't know how many hymns we're going to sing, what hymns we were going to sing, where I was going to put the message in that service, it would be unsettling for us because we like these traditions. So traditions help us to ground ourselves in reality, but also to help us to affirm who we are. And so we need traditions as a part of our lives, both our spiritual life and every other part of our lives. And so traditions give us 4 areas that we need in our lives. First, traditions give us a sense of being. Say being. Being. We need a sense of being with our traditions. Second is belonging. Say belonging. Belonging. Third is believing. Say believing. Believing. And fourth is benevolence. Say benevolence. Benevolence. So let's look at each of these. First, a sense of being. Traditions give us a sense of being, which means that they give us a sense of identity in who we are in relation to ourselves, others, and to God. So as Christians, when we identify as Christians, part of our identity as Christians is to worship God. So we gather typically on Sundays to worship God and Jesus. And so it's part of our identity of who we are. And this tradition of worshiping God as part of our identity goes back to at least the time of Jesus and then thousands of years before that with the Hebrew people. So it's part of our identity for our tradition of worship. Second is belonging. Tradition gives us a sense of belonging as part of a community. When God created Adam and Eve, God saw Adam by himself, and God said, it is not good for Adam to be alone, that he needs a part of community. We gathered here, both in person and online, because we need that sense of community to connect us. I think that's why COVID was so hard on many of us, is because it affected our sense of community. Because we needed that human connection. And today we have great technology that helps us to be connected in many ways, but it can never replace that human interaction. And so we have to learn how to adapt our idea of community to keep ourselves safe. Which is why these traditions during COVID affected us so much, because it greatly affected the tradition of community, the need to be in community. Next is believing. Now, as Christians, we know that we have faith in Christ, but believing also means that we have hope for humanity, that we have hope that there's something better for humanity. Now, these past few years during COVID, it has brought out the best and the worst of humanity. We've seen us come together to care for and love others. We saw us adapting to make sure that those who were isolated and lonely still had a sense of community. But we've also witnessed online and on social media firsthand the downside of humanity, the worst of humanity. And so there have been times these past few years where I have felt, do I really have hope for humanity? Perhaps like me, you thought at times, do I even want to be a part of humanity anymore? You may have seen all the things that were going on in our society, and you think, God, can you just come now and take us all away? Because there was so much pain and suffering that we've displayed, that we've seen on display these past few years. But part of tradition is that it gives us a hope in believing in something better for ourselves. You see, religion is one of the oldest forms of tradition in humanity, because the function of tradition is to give us hope for something better for humanity. And so one of the aspects of tradition that we need is believing, which leads us to benevolence. And this has to do with the acts of compassion towards one another, to showing God's grace towards one another. Now you may notice each year between about Thanksgiving and Christmas, people are generally in a lot better mood. Now these past few years it's been harder with COVID during the pandemic, but generally during Thanksgiving to Christmas, during that month, we are in a lot better spirits when we go about our daily lives. If we're at work, we may have work parties to celebrate the holidays. We're excited for family. We see family in that time of year. There's a lot more things happening to give us hope for humanity. So we're in a lot better spirits. And during that month between Thanksgiving and Christmas, people are more willing to give financially to nonprofit organizations. They're also more willing to volunteer their time to nonprofit organizations. And so we're much willing to give our benevolence towards others during Thanksgiving to Christmas. But on January 1st, you may have noticed that our Christmas spirit kind of takes a nosedive very quickly. When January hits, or for Christians right after the day of Epiphany, around January 6th, the Christmas spirit tends to go downhill because we start to realize we have a large tree in our house. We have all of this trash that we've piled up with Christmas from wrapping paper and the packaging from gifts. And we start to think we have all of these decorations around here, but it's no longer Christmas. Our Christmas spirit tends to change. Some of us may be looking at our credit card statements, and we start to think, I was in such a good mood in December buying all these gifts, but now the bill has come, that our Christmas spirit takes a nosedive very quickly. We go about in our communities, and people seem to be more on edge now that Christmas has passed. But see, tradition gives us a sense of benevolence in having that act of compassion towards others. And I bring this up because our Christmas spirit seems to take a nosedive, but this year, here at Grandview, our Christmas traditions have been altered. And so this past Wednesday, downtown in our community at the Jenks building, we had our first in-person Christmas Eve service, which was a hybrid service with online. But we were planning last December 24th, a week ago, to have our first Christmas Eve service here in our sanctuary in person in 2 years. And we were so geared up for it that we knew that we were going to have, I was so confident that we were going to have it this year. We had a handle on COVID, that we knew that we could do it this time. And the day before Christmas Eve, December 23rd, we started to discuss, and we knew that Winter Storm Elliott was coming to our area. And we started to reflect on this and thinking about how safe it was for us to have this service, to get into the building. And my heart started to sink because we had come so far. Yet then the realization came that we could not do Christmas Eve in the sanctuary at that time. And so my mind is racing for about 30 seconds. One, with frustration. We can't cancel it. We came this far. We have to have this service. But it's not safe to do that. But we want to get back to this tradition of having this service. But it's not safe to do that. And I thought in my mind, well, maybe we'll just skip it and we'll get back on track with our other church traditions. But it was suggested, why don't we just have it on Sunday morning, on January 1st? Which sounded exciting to me, but it also has a lot more confusion in my head. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but when my traditions are altered, I get very frustrated, very upset. Now, as a pastor, most of our job, especially with leading worship, is tied to traditions. I didn't realize that as much until this past month when I'm looking at this Christmas tradition theme for Advent, that much of my job up here preaching and leading worship is tied to tradition. So for the church, the first Sunday of the church is the first Sunday of Advent. So we have our 4 weeks of Advent. Then we have Christmas Eve. And then we might have a Sunday off between Christmas and Epiphany. Then we have Epiphany, and we have Baptism of the Lord. Then we have a few weeks break before we get to Ash Wednesday in the season of Lent. So as a pastor, your mind works within these traditions. But if we don't have Christmas Eve on Christmas Eve, then that changes my tradition for the rest of the year. So I'm still baffled how this all works out going forward, but I have trust and faith in God that God will lead us and we'll have this worked out. But thinking about all these things, it dawned on me that Christmas is a tradition that we all need to celebrate. And so we had to adapt it this year for safety concerns in the weather in our area. But I think we need the experience of celebrating Christmas. We need this experience of going through this service together, of celebrating Christmas. These past 2 years, we had to adapt it to be only online. This year, it's between online and in person. But we've had to adapt it because I had a thought and realized that we all need these traditions. We need this sense that proclaiming the message that God is with us. We need the tradition of singing Silent Night together. Now, the truth is, for many years, I was not a fan of keeping traditions. I only kept traditions because people in my family insisted that I keep traditions. So they wanted to celebrate traditions, and so I celebrated traditions. I was not even a fan of celebrating the tradition of my birthday. Others made me celebrate my birthday. But this past year, in going through COVID, I realized that those traditions really help to ground us when everything else in our life is falling apart. And so we need these traditions because they help root us in who we are. They help us to establish our identity. They give us a framework to operate when all the world seems to be in chaos. Even for many Christmases, I was not a fan of decorating my house for Christmas. I felt it was a lot of work to get out the decorations and put up the tree and then have to take it down a few weeks later. But when you have children, your perspective on that changes. And it's very good for us to teach children these traditions because it helps children to be rooted in who we are in our identity. And so I've come around to realize the importance of traditions, that traditions are needed for all of us because they help to root us in who we are. So when we look at the Christmas story, and we know this story, we read it every year in Luke chapter 2, I think about the traditions that were happening in that context. That we have the shepherds, Now, shepherding is the oldest tradition of work on earth. Shepherding is the oldest tradition of work on earth, and Abel was the first shepherd on earth. Now, these shepherds were tending their flock, their tradition, year after year after year after year. And as we learn in the story, they were doing that again on this night, following their traditions, until God altered that tradition. And God altered that tradition by sending the angels to proclaim to them that Christ was born in Bethlehem, that God was with them, that God came to redeem them. And we could see in this that God did not necessarily get rid of their tradition of being shepherds, but God added to their tradition of being shepherds. And I think that's the struggle that we have when our traditions are altered, is if we have to give up these traditions or change them, where is God in this? But with the shepherds, God did not stop them from being shepherds. God did not end their tradition, but God added to it by speaking to them. So the shepherds then went to speak to Mary and Joseph. They saw all of the angels had proclaimed to them. And when they told this to Mary and Joseph, all that they had seen and heard out in the fields, it says that Mary pondered all these things in her heart. Luke chapter 2, verse 19, Mary reflected and pondered on all these things in her heart. And for many years, I always thought that Mary just pondered and reflected on what the shepherds told her, what they had experienced that night out in the fields. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that perhaps Mary was not just focusing on what the shepherds told her that night, but she was reflecting and pondering the past year of her life, all that she had been through when the angel first appeared to her and pronounced that she will carry the child of God. She was reflecting and pondering on her experience with Joseph when she told him in his response. She was reflecting and pondering on her experience with Elizabeth in the pregnancy of John the Baptist. She was reflecting and pondering on her journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and there's no room at the end. So she was reflecting on all of these things and all of these traditions, both the ancient ones that she had experienced and the new ones that we're developing. And I think for us, it's important that we stop and reflect on all of these traditions, both our Christmas traditions and the other traditions that we have. And one of these traditions that I do have for many years is that I will keep my nativity out all year long. So I have small nativities, and I keep them either in my office or at home, in my home gym. And I keep those nativities out all year long to remind me to always be in the Christmas spirit. That Christmas does not end after Epiphany. That Christmas keeps going. Now, there are times that I do better than others. And so I keep this nativity out to remind me to always be in the Christmas spirit. And there are some days I'm really good at that, and I'm in a better mood, and I feel I have hope for humanity. And there are other days I look at the nativity, and I think, God, is there any hope for humanity? But it is a continual reminder for me to be focused on the spirit of Christmas, to reflect and ponder all these things in our hearts. And so as we go forward in our Christmas spirit, it's frustrating when our traditions are altered, when things change in our lives. But I also think in the spirit of Christmas, God is always with us. Amen? Amen. God is our Emmanuel, that God is with us all year long. And so God is with us even when these traditions are altered or changed. That we can carry the spirit of Christmas with us going forward. So as we continue to move through our Christmas service, I want to invite you, if you have your candles, if you have your battery-operated ones, you're welcome to turn those on. And we're going to sing together Silent Night. And if you have your wax candles, I will bring these around and we can light these. But this is a tradition that began many, many years ago. And even as it was first established with Silent Night, when they first wrote this song, when they first played it the very first time, that the organ broke in the church. So they finished the hymn with a guitar. And of course, many of us know the story that during World War I, there was a moment of peace between both sides on Christmas Eve as they began to sing Silent Night together. So this is one tradition that we have that is important, that we all sing together. So we invite you to stand as you're able and joining us in singing Silent Night. This place, carrying the tradition in our hearts, that knowing that through all things, God is with us. Amen. Amen. We invite you to be seated for the playing of the postlude.